good dog you. Come on, Blue, good dog you. Come on, Blue, you're a good dog you. Well, I showed my axe, toot my horn, gonna get you lost in the new ground corn. Come on, Blue, good dog you. Come on, Blue, you're a good dog you. Well, Blue tree, and I went to see, there's still possibly symmetry. Come on, Blue, good dog you. Come on, Blue, you're a good dog you. Blue bark and cinnamon green, lots of green, yeah. Lights are gone out, Blue took on in. Come on, Blue, good dog you. Come on, Blue, you're a good dog you. We came on foot, leading our beasts of burden over rough, uneven trails. We were ready to come all over. Sometimes we grow. I built that wagon a little sturdy, but I often wanted it to hold together. We got the milk cows behind and the chicken broken. Eleanor and the children, they never complained. I often wondered what would make a woman willingly embark on such an adventure. When the beast would mire down, she would pull with all of her might up here on the stalk. When my shoulders would sag from weariness, she would encourage us to rest, then nourish us with refreshment. Then encourage us to go another mile. She knew that going west had always been my dream, but she was determined to stand beside the river. She seemed almost eager to help me load the wagons. Samuel Kittrell, 1818.
Samuel born me whatever that would be. Low as he ride. We jolted along every drop, time not ever so slowly. We brought a few pieces with us. An axe for chopping firewood and filling a roof over our heads. Cattle for making food in. Small luminous spinning wheels for making clothes for the children. Samuel decided that we're going to go hunting and provide food for our bodies. And of course the family Bible provides food for our souls. And Mother gave us a few pieces of china for the children and me. But only for the children and me. Not for Samuel, and she made darn sure he did that. I don't think that she's ever going to forgive him for taking us away from him, for taking him away, us away from her. There are a few pieces of china that survive the trip. You know what Samuel doesn't know, and what my mother will never know? Is that I yearn every bit as much as my husband to go west. Even as a child, I could hear calling from the wilderness. Like a dove in the sky, full of wonderment and awe. Oh yes, my dear husband, I was willing. How could I possibly resist such a journey? Eleanor, 1890.
I was 12 years old when my father brought us to the Cane Creek Valley in the hills of Appalachia. My sister Elizabeth didn't quite share the adventurous spirit as everyone else in the family. When me and my brothers Lemuel and Joseph, we found one adventure right after another. One day we dressed up as Indians and wore masks. Tied our sister, kidnapped our sister, tied her to a tree, threatening to burn her at the stake. That was a great time. My mother wasn't all she was doing. My father kept us busy with chores after that. Elizabeth stayed closer to the house. A couple years later, a couple settlers came, not much like we had. Some French, some Spanish. Daniel Shipman was the first child born here, in the city of Poplar, Bluff, Sesquicentennial, 1832. In December 1941, a large group of families came, about a dozen, came from East Tennessee, led by John U. Daly. I eventually set up a homestead nearby. No longer having to live off the land like my parents, I was able to set up a canning yard that distilled it and bring down supplies to Cape Drive. Lots changed in those 30 years. It's no longer a wilderness. And we soon caught the attention of the Missouri State Assembly, who said we should separate from the southern Wayne County and pass an act stating so. On February 26, 1849, we became the inhabitants of what is now called Butler County. Solemn picture of 1848.
Butler County, originally called the District of New Madison, in March of 1805, by then Governor Benjamin Harrison, now took on a new name in honor of General William Orlando Butler, hero of the war with Mexico. The county seat was selected near the center of the land in an area with an immense growth of poplar trees. The area would eventually be called the town of Poplar, Bluff. On September 13, 1849, the First Circuit Court convened at the home of Thomas Scott on King Street, with the Honorable Harrison Tuff of the 10th Circuit Court presiding.
Well, I had a dog, his name was Blue. Bet $5 he's a good dog too. Come on, Blue, good dog you. Come on, Blue, you're a good dog you. Well, I showed my axe, tooted my horn, gonna get fit, hustling a new ground corn. Come on, Blue, good dog you. Come on, Blue, you're a good dog you. Well, Blue treed and I went to see their step hustling a cemetery. Come on, Blue, good dog you. Come on, Blue, you're a good dog you. Blue bark and cinnamon green, possum green. Yeah, like sugar out, Blue took on me. Come on, Blue, good dog you. Come on, Blue, you're a good dog you. Well, Blue, wide eyes so red, chasing them possum till I almost dead. Come on, Blue, good dog you. Come on, Blue, you're a good dog you. Well, Blue died, shook so hard, shook the ground in my backyard. Come on, Blue, good dog you. Come on, Blue, you're a good dog you. When Blue died, laid him in the shade, dug his grave with silver spade. Come on, Blue, good dog you. Come on, Blue, you're a good dog you. Well, don't think that love's of mine, who wouldn't have left me behind. Come on, Blue, good dog you. Come on, Blue, good dog you. First thing I'll do, I'll grab a horn, I'll blow for Blue. Come on, Blue, good dog you. Come on, Blue, I made you. And if I hear that old blue dog bark, well, I'll know he treated a possum in Noah's Ark. Come on, Blue, good dog you. Come on, Blue, you good dog you. Well, I had a dog and his name was Blue, and I bet you $5 he's a good dog too.
Butler County lies between latitude 37 degrees, 38 minutes. Longitude 90 degrees, 91 minutes. Bounded on the east by Stoddard and Duncan counties, and on the north by Wayne County. On the south by Arkansas, and on the west by Ripley and Carter counties. Extends 36 miles north to south, 26 miles east to west. Good.
Although slowly, Butler County began to grow and prosper. Land sold at $1.25 per acre. Ferry charges ranged from 75 cents for a 6-horse mule or oxen team to a nickel for a single man or horse and cow. And the first purchase of a town lot occurred in May 17, 1850 for $9.75 cash. By the end of 1850, Butler County was fully organized. Residents originally delighted at getting away from civilization that included taxes, now paid a grand total of $278.30 in county and state tax. Most was paid in furs of coon, mink, and otter. No one complained, however. Furs were as useful as gold. Bartering for necessities was now a way of life.
Butler County was a respectable place to live in the early days. Everybody respected the right neighbor. Folks helped others, took care of those in need. We worked too hard to find time to get into mischief. My job as sheriff was effortless. Folks in Butler County wanted to do what was right. Expected other people to do the same. Newton Laws, 1853.
But the law-abiding nature of Butler County citizens changed as the Civil War approached. Conditions were beginning to worsen dramatically. The county, being on the dividing line between the North and South, became the arena for marauding parties and guerrilla warfare. The constant movement of both armies kept the area in constant turmoil. Houses were frequently raided by soldiers from North and South, terrorizing communities. Neighbors no longer trusted neighbors. Civil violence caused many families to flee the area. At the beginning of the Civil War, Butler County's population was 2,891. There were about 12 families living in Poplar, Bluff, county seat. They began to flee according to where their sympathies lie. James Ferguson stayed, however. In 1859, he built a large home on Maple Street. Now, however, the home was needed for other purposes. James and his family did not hesitate. They opened up their home for use as a hospital for wounded Civil War soldiers, whether they were from the North or the South.
We were terrified. War had pitted neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend. We were afraid to tell anyone where our sympathies lay, except for Squire Duffy. He wasn't afraid to tell anyone that he would sympathize with the war. Oh, the war was an awful thing. My husband was dead. I was alone. He owned and operated a ferry to cross the St. Francis River. After he died, I tried to carry on, but I knew I needed help. So when Mr. Johnson, what he said his name was, came up and asked for a job, I thought he was heaven sent. He seemed so nice. Never occurred to me not to trust him. But he started asking me questions about where the Squire stood in the war. But I didn't tell him anything. We didn't talk about that to anyone, not even our closest friends. Next day, they found the Squire's body hanging from a tree in his home in Robar. Oh, the community was horrified. All I could think about was Mr. Johnson asking over and over. A few days later, some men came to the house, were asking about Mr. Johnson. Please down at the ferry, I said, and I watched as they walked down the river. Then I followed, close enough so that I could hear. Their voices were loud. They said they were Confederate soldiers. They wanted to know why an able-bodied man like him wasn't in service to the South. Well, his voice got loud. He said, I'm a Southern spy and I'm responsible for having Squire Duffy home. Well, after that I was so afraid. I ran back to the house as quietly as I could, locked all the doors. I never knew if Mr. Johnson came back to the bunkhouse that night. Next day, the sheriff came by and said that they'd found Mr. Johnson's body hanging over by Squire Duffy's yard, hung with the same kind of noose that was used on the Squire. The sheriff said those men were Union men, and the word went around town that if anyone cut down Mr. Johnson's body, they would suffer the same fate. No one did. His body hung there till after the war. With Sarah Gillen, 1865.
It was not unusual for soldiers to enter a home and demand a family's possessions. The Sparkman home on Old Military Road at King Creek was raided numerous times while soldiers carried away anything of value. On one incident, they took a young brown mare and left the son and tried to protect her, beaten unconscious. Another family was visited, however, with entirely different results.
I happened to be at the Daniel Jennings home near the 2nd and Vine one winter day when a detachment of Union soldiers took possession of the town. The family was rendering large. Several of the soldiers came in. Daniel's daughter, Beatrice, was quite upset by the occasion as the marauders began to recklessly ransack the home. became even more upset when several of them went upstairs to the attic where her bedroom was. Beatrice owned a splendid silk dress that was quite proud of. She kept it boxed up underneath the bed. All the young ladies in the town were quite envious of it. Beatrice was very proud of it. Her worst fears were realized when one of the soldiers came downstairs carrying her dress. She didn't think twice about it. She just pounced on him, trying to recover that dress. He hadn't considered the difference in size and strength. Soldier threw her down. Beatrice reached into the fireplace and grabbed a dipper full of scalding lard and flung it on him. Well, amidst his screams and amidst the cheers of his fellow soldiers, Beatrice recovered her dress, while the offender ran outside and rolled in the snow. John Freer, 1864.
At the beginning of the Civil War, the town of Poplar Bluff had boasted 12 factories. By the end of the war, only 5 were left.
John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave, but his soul keeps marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul keeps marching on. He went to be a soldier in the army of the Lord. Went to be a soldier in the army of the Lord. Went to be a soldier in the army of the Lord. And his soul keeps marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul keeps marching on. John Brown died that slaves might be free. John Brown died that slaves might be free. John Brown died that slaves might be free, and his soul keeps marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul keeps marching on. His dead land will meet him on the way. His dead land will meet him on the way. His dead land will meet him on the way. And his soul keeps marching on.
But life in Butler County after the war would improve. In 1865, Governor Fletcher would appoint a new set of officers in the county. Chaos and confusion would be replaced by the orderly process of law. Those who fled in times of conflict and turmoil would eventually return to make a peaceful life, and the county would begin to grow once again. But Butler County grew slowly for a few years. Business resumed, but little growth was immediately evident. In 1869, the first newspaper, the Blackwater News, would encourage people to move to the region. In 1870, Poplar Bluff would be incorporated into a town. And in 1872, the St. Louis, Iron Mountain, and Southern Railway Company would build lines into Poplar Bluff from the north and the east.
A lining track, Lord, lining track, and these old rails by the bus stop back. Old boys kick line on like to see Eloise go line and track. Well, little Eloise sitting off in the shade, counting up the money, and I ain't mad. I said, oh boys, can't you line on me? I said, oh boys, can't you line on? I said, oh boys, can't you line on? I like to see Eloise go line and track. Well, if I could, I surely would stand on the rock where Moses stood. Oh, boys, can't you line on? I like to see Eloise go line and track. A line and track, Lord, line and track. These old rails about to bust my back. Well, Captain, won't you come here quick? These old rails about to bust my back. These old rails about to make me sick. You keep talking about the giant ahead. You ain't ever mentioned my hog and my bread. I said, oh boys, can't you line on? I said, oh boys, can't you line on? I said, oh boys, can't you line on? Well, I can see Eloise go line and track.
One evening there arrived by stage the stranger, neatly attired, and who seemed to have a peculiar curiosity. He gave every indication of being a man of ability. Going to the Grand Central Hotel, kept by Uncle Dan Kitchens, he registered under the name of Brown of St. Louis and was shown to his room. Who was he? What was his business? These were the burning questions of the hour. He came down to dinner and then went back to his room. Next morning, he walked down to the post office, received 2 or 3 letters, smoked a good cigar, and went back to his room. Later that afternoon, he sat in the office of the hotel. Some of the bolder spirited men engaged him in conversation. He seemed a sociable and intelligent man, but his talk was general and evaded all personal questions. Thus matters went on for the next several days, and the entire village was on edge. Vague rumors spread that Brown was not his name nor St. Louis's home, and it became a patriotic duty of everybody to find out. Several approached him, but he managed to evade every direct inquiry with evident coldness. That was when I was called on. As a member of the Board of Trustees and a lawyer, others requested that I be the one to beard the lion in his den and ascertain his business. I agreed to make the frontal attack. I had met Brown before, so I dropped in casually, and casually taking a seat near the stranger, I opened fire as follows. Ever been to Poplar Bluff before, sir? Never, sir, he answered, immediately wary. How much longer shall we have you with us? About 2 weeks. That's so. Traveling for pleasure? No. Pardon me, sir, I said, may I ask, not from idle curiosity, but for peculiar reasons, what business do you represent here? He took a long, slow drag off of his cigar, obviously thinking. Finally, he spoke. Your name is Snoddy, a town trustee, I believe. I am, sir, I answered. Well then, he said, taking another puff. I don't mind telling you. In fact, I suppose you have a right to know. Well, I stole a mill and got away with it all right. But I slipped back to steal the dam and was caught, tried, and convicted. The judge gave me a choice. 6 weeks in jail or 3 weeks in Poplar Bluff. Like a damn fool, I took Poplar Bluff. A solemn hush followed this frank disclosure, and the stranger in his cigar strolled away toward the post office. I, on the other hand, made some forcible and unprintable remarks and strolled away in the other direction. John Snoddy, 1870.
Shall by, won't you cry? Go to sleep, my little baby. me. Shabbat, don't you cry, go to sleep, my little baby. Shabbat, don't you cry, go to sleep, my little baby.
With the advent of the railroad in 1872 came mills and factories, drawing many to the vicinity. Suddenly work and money seemed plentiful. As the county grew, commercial enterprises of every nature were born. Retail and service businesses concentrated in Poplar, Bluff, the Neelyville, Fisk, Hewland, and other communities of the county also had their share of entrepreneurs. But rapid and intense growth also brought its own set of problems. Most of the citizens of Butler County were hard-working, home-loving, developing churches, schools, civic projects. Now, however, a large group of transient, careless folks flocked to the mills and factories during work hours and caroused in the streets and saloons the rest of the time. Along with other kinds of industry, the beef market also added its share of unique problems. The Southwest furnished great herds of long-horned cattle to be transported to the Northeast, and the Iron Mountain Southern Railroad was the main artery for shipping. A federal law required that the cattle be unloaded, fed, watered, and rested in transit. Poplar Bluff was selected as one of those stopping points.
It was disgraceful. This was a nice place to live until they built that stockyard on the south end of town, close to our house. Too close. And cowboys arrived on trains with their horses. Cowboys, they ride up and down the street, shooting off their guns in the middle of the afternoon. Why, a friend of mine who knows tells me he has even seen cowboys ride their horses right into the saloon, take a drink right off the bar without even dismounting. And lumberjacks, well, they're just as bad. Seems folks don't even get excited anymore when they hear a pistol pop. I'll tell you one thing, if we had as many schools and churches in Butler County as we do saloons, we'd be a heap better off. Desi Baker, 1881.
Times were bad for a while. The laws and conditions had to be changed. That much we knew. Our families had to be saved. It took an act of honest citizens, men and women, who were willing to take a stand and wanted something better for their children. So we met and hired the first police officers. Fearless men of integrity. Men who were also handy with stick shooting. These men would serve and protect us. Ben F. Turner, 1882.
If the coming of the railroad brought mixed blessings for others, it was even more so for Elizabeth and me. Farming one day near the Big Creek Bridge, I saw a bundle tossed out of the window of train number 4. I decided to go over and investigate it. It wasn't far from me. As I reached it, I realized it was a valise. And I figured there might be something of value to somebody inside it, so I unfastened the straps, looked in. I couldn't believe what I saw.
It was a newborn baby, a little boy. Poor thing, he'd been severely injured in the fall. The doctor came, but he didn't think the baby would live. We nursed him day and night while we were out, and little by little he began to get better. William said it was our duty to try to find out who he belonged to, so we sent a photograph up and down the Iron Mountain line. I prayed earnestly no one would lay claim to him. Anyone that would throw away a baby.
We named him William Moses Gould. Gould left the railroad magnate Jay Gould, and Elizabeth wanted to name him William after me.
And we called him Moses after the infant Moses found in the Butler.
William and Elizabeth Helms.
And William Moses Gould, 1902.
With the arrival of the railroad, the outside world suddenly didn't seem so far away. It would not only open the county to outside markets and supplies, it would provide a reliable means of travel. People would now be able to commute to jobs and visit relatives in nearby towns. Other types of travel would improve as well. In the early days of Butler County, there had been no bridges or ferries. The first bridge over Black River in 1868 was one of many to come and soon put most of the ferries out of business. By the 1870s, many wooden bridges would exist along Cane Creek, Little Black River near Hilton. In 1900, Butler County's population had reached 16,769, 4,000 of which lived in Poplar, Bluff, the county seat. It had finally generated electricity, a public water supply, a new high school, and a new department store. By 1902, it had a new city hall, and in 1913, it would have 3.5 miles of brick paved streets. Those streets would eventually whet the appetite of the area. By 1920, construction would begin on the first concrete highways in Butler and the adjoining counties, paving the way for our modern highway systems today. Industry also grew like wildfire. By 1907, the county seat would have 57 manufacturing plants, employing 1,387 individuals with a total annual payroll of nearly $600,000. 1900. But even as the growth in industry occurred, Butler County residents would not forget the love they had for their country. When World War I broke out, every eligible resident rushed to serve, doing anything and everything possible to earn the right to fight for freedom. 146 of those were gathered together by Walter H. Kennedy to photograph Poplar Bus Company M, 6th Missouri Infantry, the Missouri National Guard.
Mademoiselle Marquise Parlez-vous. Mademoiselle Marquise Parlez-vous. Mademoiselle Marquise, she hadn't kissed in 40 years. Singing Parlez-vous. She never could keep the love of a man. Parlez-vous. She never could keep the love of a man. Parlez-vous. She never could keep the love of a man. She took her bath in a talcum can. Parlez-vous. The 77th went over the top. Parlez-vous. The 77th went over the top. Parlez-vous. The 77th went over the top. Nobody thought they'd ever stop. Parlez-vous. The medical corps, they held the line. Parlez-vous. Medical corps, they held the line. Parlez-vous. The medical corps, they held the line with pinky pills and iodine. Parlez-vous. The officers got all the steak. Parlez-vous. The officers got all the steak. Parlez-vous. The officers got all the steak, and all we got was a bellyache. Parlez-vous. The general got the croix de guerre. Parlez-vous. The general got the croix de guerre. Parlez-vous. The general got the croix de guerre. The son of a gun wasn't even there. Parlez-vous. American soldier on the Rhine. Parlez-vous. American soldier on the Rhine. Parlez-vous. American soldier on the Rhine. Kissed the women and drank the wine. Parlez. Parlez. Parlez-vous.
By 1919, the end of the war was celebrated as the Doughboys, as they were called, returned, raiding through the downtown streets, joined by friends and family members. They traveled by the steps of the new Poplar post office, built only 5 years earlier. But all of them would not return. 8 men out of Company M gave their lives for their country in the war, and many others were wounded. Had Samuel and Eleanor Kittrell been still living in 1919, they would have looked with wonder on the changes occurring within the 100 years since they first set foot on Cane Creek soil. Their son, Solomon Kittrell, did live to see the beginning of the railroad era before he passed away in 1872. There would be many changes yet to come that even he would not have the opportunity to anticipate.
Well, every Monday morning, when the bluebirds begin to sing, you can hear them hammers a mile more. You can hear John Henry sing. You can hear John's tambourine. You can hear John's tambourine. John Henry said to his old lady, won't you cook my supper soon? I got 90 miles to try to lay. I'm gonna lay my line. Yeah, I'm gonna line. I'm gonna line, 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 boom. Yeah, I'm gonna line, 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 boom. John Henry had a little baby. He could hold my one hand. Last words heard the boy say was my daddy's steel driver man. Yeah, I'm daddy's steel driver man. My daddy's steel driver man. My daddy's steel driver man. Well, John Henry said to the captain, Captain, when you go to town, won't you bring me back a 10-pound more for the lay your steel on down? For the lay your steel on down. For the lay your steel on down. John Henry said to the captain, you know, man, nothing but man. But before I let this steel gang down, I die with a hammer hand. Well, I die with a hammer hand. Yeah, I die with a hammer hand. Yeah, I die with a hammer hand. Well, John Henry had an old lady named Pauline. John Henry took sick, he had to go to bed. Pauline go steal like a man. Pauline go steal like a man. Pauline go steal like a man. John Henry had an old lady, and a dress she wore for red. Headed down the track and never looked back, said, I'm gonna wear my man drop dead. I'm gonna wear John Henry drop dead. I'm gonna wear John Henry drop dead. Yeah, I'm gonna wear John Henry drop dead. Now some said he's from England, some said that he's from Spain. I say he's nothing but a Louisiana man, just little steel driving gang. Little steel driving gang. Just little steel driving gang.
Along with the growth of Butler County came the need for schools, subscription schools, provided the earliest education, organized by parents concerned about their children's need for learning. But the quality of instruction depended largely on who they could find to teach. Few standards existed for education. The first state report on Butler County education in 1854 had 6 schools and teachers, and a total of 260 children attended, in spite of the fact that 576 were eligible. This too would change. By 1884, the enrollment of school-aged children in Poplar, Bluff alone was 300, with an average attendance of over 200. County schools were organized in every township of Butler County, but finances were limited, and school terms lasted only 4 months out of the year.
I was distressed because of that kindergarten and preschool opportunities when I went to Poplar Bluff. So I did what any other good teacher would do. I opened one on the corner of Main and Broadway. Then in 1897, the school board called me and asked me if I would consider teaching. They offered me $40 a month in a one-room schoolhouse. Now that schoolhouse, it was about anything we wanted it to be. On Sunday morning, it was church. On Saturday evenings, we had community socials, dances, and pie dinners, and potluck suppers. On other nights, we had speakers come in from nearby towns. We had revival meetings. We even had quilting groups. The most important thing that school did was to teach our children. Oh, and some of the children were just so eager to learn. And the other children, they had a reputation for disobedience and downright unwillingness to be taught. I usually knew who they were by the end of the first day. But we managed, and the school grew until we could hold no more. Then in 1902, a
brand new brick four-room school. And it too continued to grow. Now, I've been known to say facetiously that I may have, at one time or another, disobeyed the law, being since in my primary room, I taught future sheriff, prosecuting attorney, state trooper, and a future bank cashier. I knew that if I got in any trouble, one of them would get me out of it. Well, maybe.
The one-room schoolhouse also had another use. Political speakers were often known to use it as a platform for speeches, polls, and campaign rallies.
I'll not soon forget that cold autumn night last year when the Republican candidates met at the Cane Creek School for a campaign rally. Being the teacher at the Cane Creek School, it was my job to make sure there was fire in the furnace and a hot coffee boiling. That was the night the lid blew off the coffee pot. Ralph Bloodworth and Fred Norton, standing near the stove, thought that's what was blowing up. They tore out that door. And that Bob Standard, he wrote it on his newspaper article, put it in the Daily American Republic the very next day, even when he promised me he wouldn't. I thought I would die of embarrassment. Mildred Bennett Johnson, 1939.
Come and gather around me, children, and a story I'll tell. My pretty boy floating down my old home, doing well. It was in the town of Shawnee on a Saturday afternoon. His wife beside him in the wagon as in town he rode. There deputy sheriff approached him in a man right the road, using words of vulgar language, and his wife she overheard. Well, pretty boy grabbed a lock chain and that deputy grabbed a gun, and in the fight followed, well, he laid the deputy down. He took to the hills and mountains, lived like a shame. Every crime in Oklahoma was added to his name. He took to the hills and mountains, made him real sure. Pretty boy found welcome at many farmers' door. It was many a poor farmer, same old story to tell. Pretty boy comes to dinner, left $1,000 bill. In Oklahoma City, on a Christmas day, came a whole carload of groceries and a letter that did say, well, he said I'm an outlaw and he said I'm deep, but here's a Christmas dinner, all family's on me. Well, in this world I wander, I see many funny men. Some probably with 6 guns, some with fountain pen. And in this world I wander,
strengthened by their strong faith in their God. Despite the many hardships they endured in their travels to what they called their promised land, Daniel Shipman, born on October 28, 1832, was not only the first white man born in what would become Butler County, he was also a pioneer of faith. An early pastor of Cane Creek Missionary Baptist Church, and eventually helping with many others, Daniel helped dedicate many of the new churches in Butler County. John U. Daly was instrumental in starting the Shiloh Methodist congregation on Upper Cane Creek. Camp meetings were held and homes were vetted until sometime after the Civil War in 1865, and the first church building were built. This group was named the Mother of Preachers because of the 23 men that eventually set out into the Methodist ministry. The Christian and the Presbyterian, Episcopal, along with the Catholic faith, flourished. The founding of churches was a common thread woven throughout Butler County. The settlers remained steadfast in their faith despite their trials, and trials were many. Missouri fever had struck many on their travels toward the destination. The Civil War had turned brother against brother. The cholera epidemic was following in 1873, the flu epidemic of 1918, and then at 3:17 in the afternoon of May 9, 1927, the tornado struck in Poplar, Bluff.
It was a catastrophe, the likes of which I had never seen. They said it started on South 5th Street and then turned north towards the business section of town. I don't know, it seemed everywhere to me. Debris filled the air, and hundreds of cars were crushed between tons of brick and steel. Homes were just completely destroyed, as if they were made of straw, completely leveled.
When I closed my eyes at night, I could still hear it. It sounds as loudly as if it were still closing in on us. I was in the kitchen with Rose. When it approached, it happened so quickly. There was no place for us to hide except the closet. I tried to shield Rose with my body and cover us both in the coat. I could hear things crashing and breaking, but I didn't dare look up. I had to hold on to the baby. The sound grew louder and louder, screaming in my ears. I just kept whispering, "It'll be all right, Rose. It'll be all right. It'll be all right." And then the sound died down slowly. I was afraid to open my eyes. I knew the house would be gone. Then I realized I couldn't hear Rose crying anymore. I looked down. Oh, dear God, she was gone. The wind had taken her right out of my arms, but I didn't even know it.
When I arrived home, my wife was hysterical. As soon as we realized what happened, we began searching through the wreckage of what once was our home. It seemed hopeless. We didn't know whether to be terrified or relieved that we couldn't find her amongst all the twisted metal and wood. Every hour that passed, whatever hope that we had harbored began to die. 18 hours later, after the storm, my neighbor came over with a lantern in his hand and told me that a baby had been found on the east side. I dare not tell my wife, but we left Martha at the shelter set up by the Red Cross, and I followed my neighbor. That trip through town seemed terrible. We weaved in and out of wreckage. I felt numb. People were crying all around. But then, something touched my soul like a lifeboat calls to a drowning man. Up ahead was this shack, and in the lantern light you could see this elderly woman standing holding a bundle in her arms. It was a baby, crying at the top of its lungs. It was Rose. I'd know that cry anywhere. Well, I
Rushed over to the poor old woman, scared her half to death as I grabbed Rose out of her arms, still crying. Well, my neighbor, he was distressed at Rose's cries. He said, "Don't worry, Henry, we'll get a doctor, do all we can." I just started laughing uncontrollably. He must have thought I'd lost my wits. It took me a minute or so to compose myself before I could explain. You see, this wasn't a cry that said I'm hurt. It was a cry that said I'm hungry. Well, we went back, and I praised God all the way home. We may have not had our home anymore, but we had each other. As I placed Rose back in my wife's arms, still crying, we had to laugh, both of us, because she knew that cry too. It was just then that I remembered where my priorities lie, and I thanked God again. Henry, Martha, and Rose Brown, the year of our Lord, 1927.
We were so scared. It was almost time for school to be over when the wind started getting louder and louder. Our principal, Miss Minnie Smith, came and looked inside the room and said, "Everybody to the shelter." She took us down into the shelter. It got worse after that. Some of us started screaming and crying. I wondered if Mom was home. I wish she was here. I was so afraid. I looked at Miss Minnie Smith and began to cry. She just put her arm around me and said, "It's all right to be afraid. But just remember, I'm right here." She and the other teachers leaned over us in case anything came crashing down on us, it would hit them first. I don't think I'll ever forget that. Lucy Adams, 1927.
The Red Cross brought in supplies as quickly as possible. 60 tents, multitudes of cots, clothing, and other necessities that would be needed by families made homeless. With no power in the building in ruins, there was no way for the daily American to provide a paper. Only a list of the known deceased was able to be issued the following day. Printed on a job press operated by hand. The Red Cross announced that 325 families had suffered either death or injury or property loss during the tornado. But they were valiant. Within only a few days, visitors to the town were met by citizens posting stickers on automobile windshields which read, "Poplar Bluff welcomes you. We were down but not out. Watch us come back."
Well, Mary wore 3 links of chain. Every link was Jesus' name. Keep your hand on that bow. Hold on. Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord. Keep your hand on that bow, Lord. Hold on. Well, Paul and Silas went to jail. You know nobody had to go their bail. Keep your hand on the plow, Lord. Hold on. Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord. Keep your hand on that plow, Lord. Hold on. Well, Paul and Silas there in a shout. The doors busted open. They walked out. Keep your hand on that plow. Hold on. Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord. Keep your hand on that plow. Hold on. Well, Mary, Luke, Matthew, John, all the apostles dead gone. Keep your hand on that plow, Lord. Hold on. Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord. Keep your hand on that plow, Lord. Hold on. Well, I know, but I've been told the streets of heaven are paved with gold. Keep your hand on that plow, Lord. Hold on. Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord. Keep your hand on that plow, Lord. Hold on.
As Butler County continued to grow, life doesn't really consist of survival anymore. Leisure and entertainment also became important with citizens. Ball teams, swimming holes have been popular for years, even bathing beauty contests. The Criterion Theater, built in 1910, was the home of numerous stage shows during its day, but it would soon be replaced with the opening of the fancy new Rogers Theater in 1949.
I know my brother Jim and I don't agree on very much, But there's one thing we always agree on. We sure won't ever forget the night this spring when the Rogers Theater opened. Jim was 8 and I was 13.
I was 7.
You were born in 1941 and your birthday's in April. You were 8.
Oh,
Last thing Mom said to me before she dropped us off in front of the theater was, I'm trusting you to keep an eye on your little brother, and don't miss the bus home, but if you do, call a taxi and we'll pay as soon as you get home. Really? My mom didn't think I was old enough to be responsible for anything. I wasn't about, so was my little brother. Would you get over here? At least that's what I thought. Keeping up with him turned out to be harder than I thought it would. I lost him twice while we were in line.
I had to count the cracks in the sidewalk.
The line was long. I guess everyone in Butler County must have been there. And there was a movie camera at the front door, and they were taking movies of everyone who went in.
I didn't like the lady at the ticket stand.
Why?
She wanted 35 cents each. That was terrible. We only had to pay 15 cents at the old Criterion.
I know, but you didn't have to argue with her.
I wanted to save money for popcorn.
Then they had the ushers take us to our seats. Boy, was it huge! I thought it was the biggest place I'd ever seen. And the seats were soft and everyone was dressed up nice. Jim wanted to sit up in the balcony. He thought we could see better from up there. I guess he was right. But I didn't see how you could get a bad seat in the whole place. I mean, the screen was so big and the seats were steep. We were afraid if we leaned too far forward, we'd fall all the way down and land on somebody.
And that's when they started showing movies of all of us up on the screen. When it came to me, I made faces like this.
Yeah, those were the ones we were talking about. Everyone there at the movie that night was on the movie screen, even some of my friends from school. After the movie started, Jim decided he wanted some popcorn. Mom had given us enough money for a popcorn, a soda pop, and the bus ride home. I counted it out. But as I was going down to the refreshment stand, I thought, what if I come back and I can't find him? I thought it was the biggest place I'd ever been in, and if we got separated, I might not ever see him again. And I could just hear my mom's voice in the back of my head saying, what do you mean? You lost your little brother?
So you made me go with him and I missed part of the movie. Brady cat.
You'd have seen more of the movie if you had disappeared twice when we were downstairs.
My fault, you were supposed to be keeping an eye on me.
Anyways, the movie was great. I never wanted it to end. I love westerns. But soon enough, the movie was over and it was time to go home.
That's when we really got in trouble.
After the movie was over, everybody sort of scattered. We went to wait on the bus. We had our money ready, 5 cents each. The sign was supposed to say South Poplar Bluff, but several buses came and went, and we never saw one with the right sign. And then, suddenly, there were no more buses. We didn't find out till later that the bus driver had forgot to change the sign.
That's when he decided that we'd walk home.
That was all right. Vinegar Hill wasn't that far.
It was the way we went. You should have called a taxi like Mom said.
I didn't have the money. If you were a taxi cab driver, would you pick up 2 people who couldn't pay for it? I didn't think so. So we ended up walking down Vine Street towards 11th Street. It was really dark, but we were close. I knew my mom would start getting worried about us. When we got to the Catholic cemetery, I knew we were only a couple blocks from the house.
That's when we outran the dogs. There must have been 100 of them. Now I know what meanest junkyard dog stands for.
It wasn't a junkyard, it was a cemetery. And I'm sure there were no more than 3 or 4. But we ran for our lives anyway. We ended up running all the way over to Highway 67 until we couldn't hear the dogs anymore. Then we went down 53 towards the viaduct and came around the back way on 11th Street. I was actually pretty glad to have my little brother along.
Yeah, I suspect, but it took us forever. It was 3 in the morning when we got home.
It was not. But it was late, and the house was really quiet.
That's because nobody else saw it.
Mom and Dad were out looking for us. They were going up and down 11th Street, worried sick. We missed each other all the way around. When Mom and Dad finally did get home, they were as happy to see us as we were to see them. One thing's for sure, that's a night I'll never forget.
Yeah, me either. Hey, we agreed on something.
As we in 1999 approach the new millennium, we can look back on our history with pride. Burton Brawley said it this way, quote,
Why not? Why shouldn't the spirit of mortal be proud? Life goes, it is true, like a swift flying cloud. But while it is going, and ere he has died, a man may do many things worthy of pride. The high and the humble, the meek and the brave, and all have been destined in time for the grave. But while they are living and drawing their breath, they may create something that lives after death. The builder may build, and the singer may sing, the painter may paint, while his time's on the wing. And when they are buried deep down in the grime, the things they have done will remain for all time. Man conquers the mountains, the seas, and the air, and the deserts turn gardens while under his care. He does wondrous deeds in scant space allowed. Why shouldn't the spirit of the world be proud? Up out of the darkness we reach to the light, and slowly through the ages we toil to the height. The soul of a mortal is more than its clay. The spirit of man can defy all decay. So lift up your eyes to the truth that is God's, in spite of disaster and face of all odds. The spirit of man is not wrapped in a shroud. Why shouldn't the spirit of mortal be proud? Welcome to Butler County, 1990.
Don't you cry.